This episode of Life in Books and Everything is brought to you by Crossway, publisher of The Lord of Psalm 23, Jesus, our shepherd, companion, and host. David Gibson walks through each verse in Psalm 23, thoroughly examining its three depictions of the believer's union with Christ as sheep and shepherd, traveler and companion, guest and host. I know David personally, am grateful for his ministry, for his work in Scotland, for his writing, and this is an excellent book on a very familiar psalm, and yet there are lots of good lessons for us and things that David will pull out that you may not have seen before in this warm-hearted, very pastoral, lovely book. So check it out, and thankful to Crossway for sponsoring LBE. You can go to crossway.org/plus and get 30% off with a free Crossway Plus account. Also grateful for Desiring God. Our friends there have released a new content series on biblical manhood and womanhood titled What's the Difference? 8 articles. The teachers at DG, along with some guest contributors, aim to explain and celebrate the differences between men and women at home, in the church, and in society. And really, there are few contemporary issues that are screaming at us with as much relevance as this one. I often present this issue with this question, which I think I've probably first heard it put this way from John Piper, and that is, how do you answer the question if you have a young son or daughter, your little boy says to you, "Daddy, what does it mean to be a man?" Or your little girl says, "Mommy, what does it mean for me to grow up and be a woman?" Now, what do you say? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? There's biology. We need to talk about that. But there's more than that. And this series at DG is going to help explore this important topic of manhood and womanhood. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Life in Books and Everything. Kevin DeYoung, Senior Pastor at Christ Covenant Church in Matthews, North Carolina. And I'm joined by my special guest and friend, Dr. Jonathan Master. I have quite the bio here. We don't have time for it all. He is, of course, the president of Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, teaching elder in the PCA. Your PhD from Aberdeen, is that correct?
That's correct.
What? I should know this. What did you do your PhD on?
I did Anthony Burgess and the
right.
Westminster Doctrine of Assurance.
And do you still like that? Do you follow?
I do. Yeah, no. It was really profitable. I learned a ton. I still love reading Burgess, and I'm very interested in the Doctrine of Assurance.
That's great. Gospel Reformation Network. Lots of our friends there. You're on the Executive Council. Says the Board of Directors of on the Alliance. How is the Alliance doing?
The Alliance is clipping along. The Philadelphia Conference on Reformed Theology is coming up very soon, and so that's always a big event on the calendar. And then the normal radio broadcasts and things like that. Of course, Dr. Boyce's Bible Study Hour is still a mainstay of the Alliance's work.
I listened to that. I listened to Eric Alexander.
That's right.
Which is just great. I mean,
great
just
stuff.
If you could, both of them were blessed with great preaching voices.
It's true.
Very different. You know, Eric Alexander is almost sing-songy in how he does it, but it's good. I should know this, but just going through the bio. So what were you Presbyterian when you pastored the churches in Maryland?
The one in Maryland was an independent Reformed church, so
Okay.
it was not part of a Presbyterian denomination, but in terms of its local polity, it would be Presbyterian.
So you were Presbyterian already?
I was. I mean, again, not officially,
Okay.
but I was. Yeah.
And then you also pastored in Pennsylvania?
I did. Although that was more interim. I was really serving at Cairn. I served for a couple of years as the interim pastor of our church, Cornerstone Presbyterian Church, in Ambler.
Right. And Carl was there.
Carl had been there. It was right after Carl left that there was a vacancy.
Okay, so that was, and they got a great pastor now.
That's right.
Yeah, good. All right, so Jonathan Master. And most importantly, tell me about your wife and your girls.
My wife Elizabeth is just a great joy and encouragement. We have two daughters, one of whom is a teacher, an elementary school teacher in Annapolis, Maryland, and the other of whom is a sophomore at the University of South Carolina.
Okay. Where did she teach in Annapolis?
Rockbridge Academy is the name of the school.
Okay.
It's a classical Christian school up there.
Okay. I was going to say my brother-in-law went to Annapolis Area Christian.
Yeah, that's a big one right there. She lives right around the corner from that, but Rockbridge is a little bit smaller. And I think Annapolis area has been around longer.
Yeah. Well, we are here with my friend Jonathan to talk about a great book. I mean, I am very excited about this. Thomas Murphy. Now, I have to give you've probably known about this book for a long time. I have to give a shout out to our friend Jason Halopoulos, because I asked Jason last year for one of his he said this was his favorite pastoral theology book. And maybe I'd heard of Thomas Murphy. I didn't know anything about him. I'm now ashamed to say. So I read it first in this print on demand Google Books scan thing, and then I thought, if only somebody could reprint this. And amazingly, Log College Press, and you can tell us about the relationship with Greenville and Log College Press here, was already in the works and almost ready. So just a month ago, this came out. Anyone watching, you can see it's a really well done. I mean, just the book republished, 550 pages. But don't let that intimidate you. This by Thomas Murphy, and we'll say more about him in a moment. Pastoral Theology: The Pastor in the Various Duties of His Office. So before we talk a little bit about the book, Jonathan, and about Thomas Murphy, how did you hear about this, and talk about Log College and how you came to republish this?
I read this book by Thomas Murphy in the early 2000s. Again, it wasn't this edition. It was an older, it wasn't a print on demand, but it was a small publisher. It was hard to find at the time, but I was desperately looking for good resources on pastoral ministry. This was early on in my pastoral work, and I was just looking for things that were biblical, that were solid, that were helpful. And I don't even remember how I stumbled upon Murphy. I don't think anyone recommended it to me, but I somehow found it. And kind of like Jason, I immediately thought this is the best thing I've ever read on this subject. And so I read it, devoured it, probably read it, parts of it at least more than once. And then it went up on the shelf. I would talk about it to people occasionally if they would ask me for recommendations, but didn't think too much more about it. But when Greenville Seminary adopted Log College Press, and we were thinking through books that needed to be republished, this was one that was at the forefront of my mind. It fit right into what Log College Press does. Log College Press reprints 18th and 19th century American Presbyterian works. So it's a sort of a narrow lane, but I think a really important one and underserved. There are some fantastic volumes out there that have not been republished recently, or if they have, it's been sort of a marginal kind of republication. And so we had Murphy in the queue since sometime last year. I can't remember when. It's a bigger book, so it took a little more time to do all the proofreading and the typesetting and to make sure everything was just right. But yeah, it was that was an amazing thing, because I saw your list of, I think it was your top 10 books of the year, and it was an honorable mention book that you had just read. And so that dovetailed perfectly, because we were just about to print at that point. So I love the book. I've recommended the book. I think I stopped recommending it as much in the last 10 years just because it was impossible to find. But now it's easily accessible. Really thankful for how it turned out.
So here's what I say. I don't usually read my blurbs, but I just want to tell you how much I like this book. I love this book, and I'm thrilled to see it being reprinted after languishing in obscurity for more than a century. As the pastor of Frankford Presbyterian Church, one of the oldest Presbyterian churches in Philadelphia, for 46 years, Thomas Murphy was a leading churchman in the 19th century. Murphy's book is to pastoral theology what Martin Lloyd-Jones' famous lectures are for preaching. Now, I know that's very high praise, but I say inspiring, challenging, comprehensive, opinionated, practical, spiritual in the deepest, best sense of the word. It really is. He's very practical. He tells you, here's how you should structure your session meeting. Here's how much time you should. And sometimes he has like Lloyd Jones does. He has things like, well, I don't know if we're going to do that. I mean, I put a question mark. He says, maybe sometimes you should forego the sermon before you have communion. Like, well, that's not a good one, but 99.9% of it. I mean, to say spiritual sounds so cliche, but I mean that in the best sense of the word. In this edition, when I read it last year, just underlining like crazy, and I would stop and I'd think and I'd ponder. I mean, it was the most heart-affecting book I read last year. And Thomas Murphy, 1823, 1900, born in County Antrim in Ireland, comes to the United States, pastors there in Philadelphia for 46 years. It's just really remarkable. What was it that really struck you when you first read it that you thought, I love this book?
I think when I first read it, there were two things that stood out. One was one you've already mentioned, which is the spiritual nature of it. And I agree with you about the Lloyd Jones comparison. I think one of the things about preaching and preachers that's so remarkable, that makes the book worth coming back to, is he has this sounds obvious. It sounds like it should be true of every book on preaching, but it's not. He has a spiritual view of preaching. He is a supernaturalist. He believes that God actually is working powerfully by his Spirit through the preached word. And so that comes through on every page. And there's a sense in which that's true of Murphy as well, even in the mundane aspects of pastoral ministry, even in things like how you run a session meeting or how you run a prayer meeting. It is clear that in his mind, this is something that is imbued with spiritual power. And so that was probably the first thing that I noticed. I will also say the part that struck me the most, both then and then rereading it as we were going to get set for this reprinting, is the first section where he talks about personal piety in the pastor. And that sort of sets the tone for the whole book and just contains line after line, paragraph after paragraph that you want emblazoned in your mind. And it's just such powerful stuff, deeply affecting. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I think that struck me at the time was just how comprehensive it was. I mean, again, I was coming to it just looking for guidance, just looking for any kind of counsel about how to do basic things, how to understand what the work of a pastor is supposed to be like day after day, week after week. You know, what should I be aiming at? What should I prioritize? What should I spend my time on? And he's detailed. I mean, he really does go through. It is a fairly comprehensive handbook. Now, again, like you said, you sort of sift the wheat with the chaff. I'm not inclined to start a temperance society.
I know that was another section.
But so there are little things like that, and there are a few things that are maybe anachronistic. But by and large, he's just giving you very concrete counsel for how to do all kinds of things in the ministry, but not in a wooden sort of mechanical way, but very much in a biblically grounded, spiritually minded way.
Yeah, I think you find, and this is true with the best, most spiritual books, that it's surprising how relevant on page after page. Like you said, I also underlined that, well, I don't think we need to lead the way in doing a temperance society. And he's got a huge section on the pastor's work in the Sabbath school. And so you see how important that was. And that's going to look a little different. But man, overwhelmingly, paragraph after paragraph, you think this is exactly right. This is what pastoral ministry is about. This is what I need to hear. And has that advantage of being an American author and written 150 years ago. So it breathes kind of that spirit of the Puritans, but it's a little easier to understand. The language is a little more concise, like we're used to, gets to the point, not so many circumlocutions. And it reads really well, and it has that punchiness. You talk about that chapter, which I was going to say the same thing, that chapter 2, you know, he begins by saying, it should be laid down as our first principle that eminent piety is the indispensable qualification for the ministry of the gospel. He says, it is before talents or learning or study or favorable circumstances or skill in working or power in sermonizing. And almost everyone is going to say, well, yes and amen, of course. But think about really in our day, there's a lot of people don't even like the word piety. That's just that in itself is kind of a bad word. We all know there's a wrong way to be pietistic. But look, I for all the times that there's a wrong way to be pietistic, I see 10 times as many people who could use some more piety in their life. And we see so many examples out there. And I just say to young men in particular, are the people you follow online, in the books you're reading, in the videos you're watching, are you struck that this man, this pastoral example, is noted for exemplary piety? And Murphy just will not let us off the hook with that.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you made a number of points that are worth underlining. First of all, I agree with you about this genre of pastoral literature, the 19th century American Presbyterians. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we want to put more of it out there, because I think it is a lot more accessible given our context and even our use of language. But I think the deeper point you're making about piety is absolutely right. And you know this, but it goes back to some of the basic statements they made at the founding of Princeton Seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And Murphy is clearly, he says this at the beginning and he mentions it throughout, indebted to Archibald Alexander. This is in some respects the Pastoral Theology book that Archibald Alexander never wrote, but Thomas Murphy, one of his students, wrote on his behalf. But that language of personal piety being a chief requisite is found throughout the writings of those men. In before the founding of Princeton Seminary, they said, if all we do, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but they said, if all we do is simply prepare men with academic rigor without a corresponding measure of personal piety, then we have done a harm to the church. In other words, if we're graduating men who are really well qualified academically and well-read, but don't have personal piety, we're not just neutral, we're not just not helping, we're actually hurting. And so that was a key note that got struck over and over again in those circles. And Murphy is just an example of that, a product of it.
Also want to mention Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Grateful for our friends there. We've been talking here with Jonathan Master, and we've been talking about the book, Pastoral Theology, The Pastor in the Various Duties of His Office by Thomas Murphy. So hopefully you are getting an appetite for this excellent book. Our friends at GPTS are making the book available for 50% off until May 5. What a Cinco de Mayo gift until the 5th of May. And whether you're a pastor or you know a pastor, or you've been a pastor a long time, or you just want to learn more about what pastors should be doing, this is an excellent book, and you should check it out. There is an expansive blurb from Kevin DeYoung on the back, and this is one of my absolute favorite books on pastoral theology, so you ought to get it. There's a free audiobook also available on Greenville's website, where you can also order your copy. gpts.edu/pastoral theology. And then also want to mention our friends at Westminster Theological Seminary. They are offering a Master of Arts in Theological Studies program. Now, we all want to be self-starters. We want to read things and learn on our own, but we need teachers. God gives us the gift of teachers, and often the discipline and the classroom setting or a cohort and to learn with others and from others is the best way to understand more about the Bible. WTS has a fully online program, maybe a good choice for those who are in life, ministry, working already, and want to explore more, want to learn, want to know how to read your Bible better and understand theology, learn subject matter from experts, and learn how to grow as a Christian. You can go to wts.edu/MATS. I underlined a ton in that first section on piety and then on sermonizing, and I gave some of those quotes here at the Coram Deo conference a couple of months ago. But there's some in the back half of the book, and it's so practical. And I just want our listeners out there who are not Presbyterian, yes, this is written for Presbyterians, but 90% of it, you wouldn't have to be Presbyterian. Yes, he has a section on the higher courts, and he assumes some Presbyterian particularities, but this is a great book for anyone in pastoral ministry. Here's one section. I wonder if you remember this, Jonathan. He has the pastor in the activities of the church, and he has a whole subsection on women's work. female prayer meetings, Dorcas societies. There's another one. I'm just a champion. I don't think we're going to get the name back, the Dorcas societies, these charitable women. But this section on pastors' aides. So he talks about the pastors, the ladies, the women's pastors' aid society in the church. Now, that's still probably a mouthful, but you and I know in a lot of our circles, there's a wrestling with if we got a group of godly women in the church who want to serve and they want to come alongside. What's the best name for that? And it often gets really dicey. And I don't know if pastors' aides can make a comeback, but what he's arguing for, I think it's great to see. This is 150 years ago. Someone who's not, probably doesn't have a feminist bone in his body. He's not arguing for any kind of women's ordination or going soft in anything. He's simply recognizing what we know to be true about the vital role that women play in the church. So he says women have the piety, they have the feeling, they have the tact, they have generally the time to do such work, and hence they can do it more efficiently than men. There are some parts of church work which they can do better than even the pastor. They can reach families, especially the female portion of them, as the other sex cannot. They can follow up impressions that are made, cultivate the acquaintance of strangers, and persevere in efforts to interest them in the church and the ordinance as men cannot or will not. It's wonderful insight into say here, 150 years ago, North Philadelphia, what do we do to get these godly women involved in the church? And to see that that's in our heritage and tradition, and you can embrace that, and you can have women doing that, and you don't need to go in an egalitarian direction to affirm all of those things.
Yeah, that was a great section. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, at the end of the section you just read, I think, isn't it there where he gives an example of basically saying to these women who were committed to aiding him in that way, if a visitor would come, hey, you go talk to them. There's a woman who just walked in. It's going to be hard for me to go up and talk to her, but you go up and make sure to talk to her and invite her to your home and those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, what comes through in that are both the things you mentioned. First of all, obviously very clear biblical understanding of church office and the function of men and women within the church, but at the same time, a clear idea, a clear notion of the indispensability of godly women in the context of the congregation. There's no hint as you read it of him sort of diminishing their role, although clearly their role is very different,
right?
But vital to the functioning and the well-being of the church.
Do you have any other one or two areas that you particularly remember? And while you're thinking of that, I'll give you one. So he talks about the pastor in the session. He's talking about the work of the elders. And interestingly, he argues for larger sessions. I know many churches, do we go smaller and we can be more tight-knit, or do larger? But he says larger, and he has a parish kind of model that you should be in charge of a district. But this is just a great one-sentence vision, men, out there for your session. He says the session should be a band of laborers closely knit together and intently bent on doing the work of God in the church, in the community. And then he really leans in. Most elders would work willingly in the cause of Christ if the work were given them to do so. So you can see he's telling pastors, you're doing all of the work yourself. You have elders who want to serve if you would just entrust some of the work toward them. There's really a lot of insight. Any particular sections that stand out that you remember, wow, that was filled with a lot of practical wisdom?
Well, again, we've touched on it already. The piety part, just almost every page, I could say was memorable, worth rereading, worth underlining. The part that that stuck out to me, because I don't think I agree with it, but I thought it was brilliant and helpful in its own way, was his whole plan of preaching.
Yes. Yes.
I'm committed, as I know you are, to essentially the main diet of the church being consecutive, expositional, expository messages from the Bible, going through book by book. I believe that's best for the health of the church. At the same time, I read that section and profited from it immensely, because what he does is he lays out these ways of, over the course of years, teaching your congregation either basic doctrines of the faith or basic events in biblical history. And he lists out the ones that he would choose, the passages that he would. And so he was doing Bible exposition, but it wasn't consecutive exposition through a book. And I thought that was so helpful, because what it did for me, even though I didn't follow that plan, although I think you could, and I think you could do it profitably, and maybe in evening worship, that's a good plan to follow. But what it did for me, it gave me insight into his mind. He was thinking so continuously about, how can I profit my congregation? How can I cause them as a whole to grow in grace and grow in knowledge of the Bible and grow in knowledge of theology? And that kind of systematic thinking was, I thought, such a that is such a great thing for pastors to cultivate. He had a plan. He had priorities. He had a clear idea of what he was supposed to do. And I think that comes through even in some of the other sections. So that's the preaching section. But when he talks about funerals, or when he talks about other special events, it's clear that he goes into those as a pastor and has a clear idea of what his biblical priorities ought to be. That doesn't mean he tries to do everything in every occasion. In fact, in the funeral section, he says, you should preach very short sermons. So it wasn't as if he was overdoing it, but he was thinking carefully about each occasion, each opportunity he had: prayer meeting, funeral, Sunday morning, baptisms, and what it was that he could do to be most useful to his people on that occasion.
Yeah, and he is like, we've used the Lloyd Jones example, in that he has these strong opinions, but yet every single one of them, you think, yeah, even if I don't agree entirely, he's onto something. He has a section which I love. He's talking about all of the cheeky titles, sermon titles. He doesn't say cheeky, but he says, these, and he's Lloyd Jones asking, calling them abominations and scurrilous, and who call them spiders, and most of them I laughed at, and then a few I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, a little catchiness would maybe be, the man who knew too little or something.
Yeah,
but you can tell what really,
that spiders one he hates.
Oh, he hated the spiders. There is in the end, as he's talking about the pastor in his session, he really does some deep pastoral care for the pastor himself, and so much wisdom. He says, the pastor need not be surprised if he finds troublers in his church. Then he says, this often shocks ministers, discourages them. And then he says, but they're going to be in every church. He will find in every pastor, and fortunately I've served at great churches and I haven't had many people like this, but every pastor will recognize there are some people sadly inconsistent. They bring constant reproach. They're complainers, fault finders. They find and invent things to annoy. They take pleasure in criticizing. They never are at peace with the pastor. And then he says, well, what to do? And you just think, okay, yeah, what would we do? And this is probably not the answer for everyone in every situation, but it's really fascinating. We would recommend, as the sovereign remedy for such troublers in the church, to simply let them alone. Our advice would be, do not notice them, do not speak of them, do not oppose them. If possible, do not think of them, and they are disarmed for evil. If they cannot excite any commotion, they soon become weary of their fruitless efforts to annoy. Alexander says, if you could act like an angel, some would blame you. Do your best, and in the long run, you will please more people than you will not. Now, again, you put caveats and, well, when do you need to go after the lost sheep? But he's just thinking of, that is really true. And there are pastors who probably have a bigger heart than I do that want to just spend all the time they can with folks like that. And sometimes this is exactly what the pastor needs to hear. Just let the squeaky wheel squeak.
Well, that's right. And to me, that's another thing that struck me. I think struck me more this last time I read through it than it did the first time I read through it. It's clear that he is an experienced pastor. He's not writing in abstractions. He's not writing theoretically. He has experienced it. And so he was 28 years in, roughly 28 years in when he wrote this, or when it was published at least. And then, of course, as you mentioned, he went on for close to 20 after that, not quite. But So he served a long time in one congregation, and he had already served a long time in one congregation before he wrote this book. And in addition to his training and the great writers and teachers that he reflects, he is experienced. And it's the kind of counsel you'd get from someone who had been in it for a long time. I think it's true. My experience, at least, is that older ministers who have been in the pastorate for a long time, particularly if they've been in one place for a long time, tend to counsel patience. Whereas I think younger men are more prone to want to solve every problem or think they can solve every problem in the first 5 years. And my experience is, and Murphy is definitely reflective of this, is that the men who are seasoned and experienced will say, nope, be patient. What the Apostle Paul says, with great patience and careful instruction. And he really does take the long view in everything he does.
Yeah, that's exactly true and very wise. I remember when I started candidating at churches, and I came armed with a very nice 3P statement of my philosophy of pastoral ministry. And I still believe it, but I said, I want to preach, pray, and spend time with people. And that was good. And I learned after about 5 years that I was missing a fourth P, which was patience. And by God's grace, people put up with probably an eager, zealous, impatient young pastor at times. But it's absolutely true. We go in there, and that's often the fourth missing P is, hey, just be patient. There are some things that you could do the easy way 6 years from now, or you could do the incredibly hard way right now. And in fact, sometimes pastors, they lack the skill or the wisdom to do things, and their ministry blows up, and it didn't have to. And you just look and you say, you could have done that a different way. And Thomas Murphy is absolutely a delightful read. I think I'll probably assign it as my main text when I teach pastoral ministry this fall. I encourage pastors to get it. Thomas Murphy, Pastoral Theology, just came out by Log College Press. Before I let you go, Jonathan, what other things, you got some things in the hopper that you can share with us coming out from our 18th, 19th century Presbyterian dead friends?
We have a couple things coming up that we're excited about. Peck's Ecclesiology, which you can get the whole 3 volumes of Peck, but we're going to do just his Ecclesiology. We've got some more Benjamin Morgan Palmer on the way, his work on prayer and on assurance. I'm trying to think what the other ones are that are coming next. I probably have them out of order, but yeah, I think the plan is to publish about 5 titles a year.
That's great, and
we're kind of on track with that right now. We just alongside the Pastoral Theology, I'll mention this because it's out already, but people who are watching this might not have seen it. We also just republished the Sermons of the Log College, which Archibald Alexander edited back in the 19th century. And there was actually a very specific reason why he did that. But in any case, those are 18th century sermons, but republished in the 19th century and then now today. And those are very, very useful as well. So yeah, we have a few things headed out soon.
Well, 3 things I have. I'll just throw them out there. You don't have to do anything with them, but I just on my wish list, other than Witherspoon, which is always there. Thomas Murphy, I read it in this big thing. This is massive, and it probably just needs some editing and it's too much information. But he wrote A History of the Log College.
Yes.
Which is more than just the presbytery of the Log College. It's really an early Presbyterian history. This was he's got more information on like every ruling elder at every church that might be interested to historians and not to the average reader. But he has some things in here about, why Presbyterianism, and that are really, really well. So this book, the other one is James Alexander, Thoughts on Preaching. That is right up there with Lloyd Jones on my absolute favorite preaching books. And then this one would need a little editing too at the back end, but I would love to see Ashbel Green's autobiography in a usable form. In fact, some student out there who's thinking, I want to do a PhD work on John Witherspoon. Don't do it. A lot of work done. Do Ashbel Green. I think I'm not aware of a lot of stuff out there on Ashbel Green in depth, major figure. So go study that, and someone can republish his autobiography.
Yeah, those are all three good recommendations. I think the Alexander on Preaching might be on the list already. I can't. Again, I don't have it in front of me, so I can't remember the order of things. I think that one might be there. The other two ones that you mentioned are ones we really should think about, and I am totally with you. Prospective PhD student, maybe you should turn back now. But if you decide to go through with your PhD, Ashbel Green, I heartily co-sign on that.
Yeah. Jonathan, always good being with you. Thank you for coming up and preaching here at Christ Covenant a few months ago, and grateful for the really good work you're doing down at Greenville. So glad we could come together over Thomas Murphy.
I love it. Thank you, Kevin, very much.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our listeners. LBE is a ministry of Clearly Reformed. You can get episodes like this and other resources at clearlyreformed.org. Until next time, glorify God, enjoy Him forever, and read a good book.